Morning, HPC. Nice to have you with us, and nice to be looking at 1 John chapter 2 verses 1 to 6. Actually, there's quite a lot of theological meat packed into these 6 verses, so if you haven't read them, please read those, please read the notes. Pause this video if you'd like to, because it could be quite heavy going, and I don't want to get the wrong end of the stick, so let's see how we get on. But if you've read the verses, it'll be hugely helpful. Now, John refers here to 2 things that are the grounds of a believer's justification. He refers to Jesus' righteous life and his atoning death. And it's on those 2 things, the fact that Jesus never sinned and the fact that Jesus' death is a sacrifice for our sins, that we have one who stands before the Father and who speaks to him as our advocate. The word translated sacrifice of atonement is not a common word in the New Testament, but it does appear at crucial points. And the reality expressed by it actually echoes all the way through the scriptures. If you're familiar with the Bible, you'll know the idea of a sacrifice of atonement, a sacrifice which turns away God's right anger, is present powerfully from beginning to the end of the Bible. So we learn that when this idea of a sacrifice of atonement, of propitiation, is applied to Jesus, we see that his death absorbs God's wrath that should be rightly directed towards us for our sin, and thereby opens for us the way for us to enjoy God's full favour. And this change of situation brings about in the heart of the believer profound gratitude. So 1 John chapter 3, see what kind of love the Father has lavished upon us. Now, verse 2 tells us that Jesus' sacrifice of atonement applies to the sins of the whole world. And we just need to tread a little carefully here. I think there are 3 ways helpfully of understanding this, and 1 way of wrongly understanding this. The first way that is helpful is to see that Jesus' sacrifice of atonement, his death on the cross, is sufficient for everyone. Now, it's sufficient for everyone, but it only applies to those who place their faith in him. So that might be a bit like a British passport. Anyone who is a British citizen can have a British passport, but you only get one if you apply for it. Secondly, Jesus' sacrifice is a fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham all the way back at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis chapter 12. The promise that all the nations would be blessed through a descendant of Abraham. And we see that in Jesus the Messiah. Thirdly, that Jesus' sacrifice is able to save believers from any background, any ethnicity, any form of religious background. All people can be saved by Jesus' sacrifice of atonement. So those are the 3 helpful ways, I think all 3 of them apply, of thinking about verse 2. And the one unhelpful way of thinking about it is what's known as universalism, the idea that everyone, regardless of faith, is saved by Jesus' death. Well, even 1 John chapter 5 says that can't be right, because chapter 5 verse 12 says this: whoever does not have the Son of God does not have life. Faith is required for this sacrifice to apply to ourselves. In verse 3, John introduces this main theme of assurance that runs all the way through the letter. It's often we're often introduced to it with the phrase "by this we know," and some form of description like that it appears about 15 times in the letter. And the ground of assurance that John presents here is actually our obedience to Jesus' commands. Now, again, we need to tread carefully, because I don't want people to get the wrong end of the stick here, and I'm worried that I might be about to say something which people will misunderstand. This is often called the moral test of genuine belief. And verse 5 seems to say that whoever obeys Jesus out of love for him finds that that very obedience reassures them that they belong to him. Now, John is not referring to faultless obedience, but rather a new direction in life, which comes about as having had a heart change, having been born again. So this isn't perfection, but this is a new direction of travel. And John is also not saying that our obedience earns God's love. He's already said, no. Verses 1 and 2 of chapter 2, it's Jesus' sacrifice that opens the way to God for us, not our obedience. But he is saying those who love God show it. There is evidence in their life of that love. And that the evidence is actually a means by which we are reassured of God's love for us and that we love him. Our obedience doesn't gain his love, but it does evidence it. Our disobedience does not remove his love, but can and does affect our assurance. We cannot confidently claim that his grace is ours if our lives are completely barren from any evidence of seeking to live for him. I hope that's clear. I hope I haven't put a stumbling block in your way. Do please be in touch with me if in any sense now you are feeling less like you're a Christian. That isn't the point of John's letter, and it isn't my prayer for you this morning. Have a really good day, HPC.